Hi, I'm Alec from easierhabits.com. Normally I'm talking about how work from home dads can design their ideal life, but this week I've been thinking a little bit about optimizing not for your own career, but for both of your careers as a couple, because that is a pain point for a lot of people. I was reading online, several people talking about, hey, I've got my dream job, should I take it? But then my partner has to sacrifice their career, what can we do? So I thought I would walk through this week with my lovely wife, Meg, how we have optimized our own careers and made work-life balance choices as a partner, because ultimately, if you're just optimizing your own career, maybe you will find happiness in that, but probably overall, or my experience overall, is it's not all it's cracked up to be in a fantastic career for yourself if your family situation isn't working out for your wife and for your kids. So, a little overview of some of the changes we've made. We were both grad students when we got married, and that made life really easy. There weren't a whole lot of lifestyle decisions that we had to make because we had a similar schedule. We just had to work around our classes, but we were both taking classes. We were both in the same place, and
we even graduated at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I graduated at the same time, so that was extremely convenient. It was only when we graduated and I was able to get a web developer gig at LinkedIn that made a lot of money that it made sense to really prioritize my career. And Meg spent some time volunteering and figuring out other things that you wanted to do, but at that time you weren't really looking for a career, right?
No, not really. We were getting ready to have our first child, actually. So right after we graduated, pretty soon thereafter anyway, we got pregnant with number one, as I will refer to him. And so that's kind of what I was doing. I was being pregnant.
Yeah, and I was working at LinkedIn. There, when I had initially interviewed, they actually said explicitly that 50 hours was kind of considered the base work week there. And there were a lot of nights that I volunteered to work on like side projects that I was passionate about, where I remember, staying up to midnight or past midnight on projects. So there's a lot of work there, which I could do because we didn't have kids at the time, but things changed a lot when we had our first kid. And, I remember kind of being stunned, being like terrified of like, all right, how do we keep this little baby thing alive? Just kind of initially adapted with, helping out a little bit in the evenings. I had parental leave, I guess, and that was fairly easy. I didn't have to like make any trade-offs at that point because I got to be at home for like a month or so.
Yeah, it was awesome.
So for a good chunk of time. But then when I went back to work, that is when I think we started really having to think about like how to balance everything as a couple. And I remember you talking to me a little bit about if I could just take bath time with our oldest, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So I always had that dream of being a mom. It was something that I'd been, kind of, I don't want to say like imbued with from, an early age, but just the upbringing that I had, motherhood was important. And so I knew that I wanted to have kids, and I loved the idea of having kids. It was wonderful. And so it's one of the reasons why I wasn't particularly career driven, is because I'd also wanted to stay home with my kids. I wanted to be that, stay at home mom. And then I had my first kid, and it was a little harder than I thought it was going to be. So it was getting to the point where you were at work, you would leave for work in the morning, and I was with number one all day. And when babies are that young, there's not a whole lot they can do, but there's a whole lot that they need. And I was having to be on constantly because he didn't sleep very well during the day. He wasn't one who would take, like good chunks of naps. He would nap for 45 minutes and then be up for an hour, and then nap for 45 minutes and be up for an hour. But I would never know when that was going to be. And so I felt like I had to be on all of the time. And I was still working part-time a little bit for someone I'd worked with in grad school. And so it was just a lot for me, and I hadn't realized how much it was going to be. So by the end of the day, after you got home from work, I just wanted to be like, here's your baby, take your baby. Please just do something. I just need something. I needed some time. And it was something that thankfully I feel like I had enough of, I don't know, teaching, I guess, from my mom to ask for what I needed. And I thought about, okay, well, what do I need? And what are my pain points at this time? And it was having to be on for so long and just needing a break, just needing something. And it worked out quite nicely that you got home right when number one needed to take a bath. And so I was like, okay, I could do bath time. That would be great. And then they could have some bonding time and I could just be alone. And of course you were more than willing. And so we started that. That was kind of, yeah, our first time that I really had to kind of say, okay, this is what I need. And it worked really well.
It did. I remember you did such a good job of taking care of Eli. I didn't really step in and volunteer like, hey, I could do this now. I was kind of waiting to take cues. And I think, after we went through that process a couple of times of you asking like, hey, I need extra help here, I kind of got it through my head like, oh, okay, I can look for these situations and volunteer them. And that kind of happened later on. But especially first, like, I just needed you to say, I need help with this.
Yeah.
Um,
And I didn't know how to do that at the beginning,
Yeah.
right? At the very beginning, I thought I have to do all of it. And then I quickly realized I can't do all of it. I'm going to be a crazy person if I try to do all of it.
Like, I thought you wanted to do all of it, or did you
I
step
thought
in?
so too. And I think that's one of the
Okay.
things, right? Is that I thought I wanted to do it all and that I could do it all. And then I ran into kind of the, reality that I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took me a while to realize that, I think. But then once I did, being comfortable enough to ask you and be like, hey, can you like do this thing? I'm not one to ask for what I need a lot of the time until it's like a really big need. Although I feel like that's something we've been able to work on in our marriage, and now I don't worry too much about that. But especially, back then, I mean, that was what, 6.5 years ago.
Wow.
But yeah, it was hard, and I think it was one of the things that did help bring us closer and made us more communicative with each other with our needs, because we finally had them, or needs that couldn't be easily anticipated or something.
Right. I mean, it's like, being in college as a couple is kind of like playing tennis with the nets down. Like,
right?
It's
like,
no
okay,
problem.
I'm going to class now.
And even like having a career, but having you be free, like no constraints. And then as soon as you either have two careers or a career and kids, I think that's a point where we really needed to take a step back and try and figure out like how to fit these needs and demands and goals into some kind of pattern that worked for the both of us.
Yeah.
And that kind of haphazardly happened. And then eventually, as more and more of these situations came up, I think we got better at that.
Yeah.
And certainly, going back to doing bath time with number one, it was really fun. It was really fun for me. I remember
he was so good at it too. It was so cute.
I remember that like the first month or two, he's in the little baby bathtub, and I would try, and it was like a game for me. I'd try and come up with something new to do with him in the bathtub every evening, whether it was like pouring water down, with a cup or something like that, and see him try and catch it in his hands, or whether it was getting your finger wet and then rubbing it against the plastic, so you made a wiki sound, and like babies love these little different sounds or different games that you could play, and so like that was great. And as he got older, it did expand it to more activities. When he was like old enough that I can kind of carry him around, he could grab things, interact with things. He'd play in the dishwater as I wash dishes, or I'd like usually have like a cleaner sink over off to the side where he could play with the water, and then I'd actually be washing dishes on the other side. But I started to do more of those things naturally, but it helped so much to have you ask, so I knew what was needed and what was helpful. Otherwise, honestly, I think I was just vegging out during this first few days when you were doing Eli time in the bath. So it was just nice to have that, sub that out for something more meaningful. And so I think the next point that I clearly remember in terms of like adjusting our work-life balance together would be about a year into LinkedIn, where they had restructured all of the job titles and the pay. And so I signed on at the lowest level, which was associate web dev. And I remember that that meant you had associate web devs who were presenting at conferences. And so like it really wasn't an entry level position, but as LinkedIn expanded, they wanted to create an entry level position for like people straight out of college. And so they retroactively made my position the entry level developer position because I'd worked before grad school. And so, there was a difference between me with 3 years of experience when I started, about 4 years of experience at this point, and someone straight out of college. And so I wasn't super happy about that. And they had so many people in this position who were ahead of that they couldn't promote. Like it eventually became a big scandal, and my boss's boss, I think, got fired or left or something like that over that because it wasn't a good position. But it was in the midst of this that I was thinking, I'm working extra long hours. I have a kid now, so that's changed things. So this was actually shortly after coming back from parental leave and kind of having some of that back and forth about, what I need to do and how I could be more involved at home. And then just seeing that like my career wasn't really being seen to because of forces outside my control. It seemed like a good chance to make a switch. And so I switched to a company. I think they matched my salary. I didn't have all of the great benefits, so it was a little bit of a net loss. But I went back to a 40-hour standard week, variable with projects, and there were crunch periods still. But it also allowed work from home sometimes. And that cut out, potentially an hour. Even though we lived close to LinkedIn, there was like crazy traffic because you couldn't get into the compound. And so we stop and go because there was LinkedIn and it was Google. Google was right on the same campus. And so like being able to be a little farther from that smaller company, less traffic, I could get there quicker every day. I could work from home. It was more family friendly a little bit. And that was, during that period, we were thinking about having our second kid as soon as possible. We're actually thinking potentially about having 3 kids as soon as possible after, together and kind of get the whole little baby phase out of the way quick.
Right. Well, we started trying for number 2 when number 1 was only 6 months old.
Wow.
I know, right? It took us a while to actually get pregnant. And so I didn't get pregnant for about 6 months. But like we started trying right away because we were like, okay, let's do this. And again, that's kind of, I think, partially my thing. I'm like, okay, let's get all the pain over fast and then, get onto the fun stuff. And number 1 was not an easy baby by any means, but it was doable looking back. I think at the time, like I felt a little bit overwhelmed, but I still kind of had this drive to, be the good, stay-at-home mom and do all of the things. And once I got into a good routine with number 1, then things were okay.
Yeah, I felt terrified with number 1, but after a couple of months of him like continuously living, then I was able to calm down.
So no SIDS, thank you.
Yeah.
But also, seeing all of those little things, and then especially, from the 6 month point on, I feel like it was pretty good. And then we got pregnant with number 2. So that it's around then that I actually it was before I got pregnant with number 2. I'd had some health complications, and so having to kind of refigure things for a little bit. But then everything got back on track, and I was pregnant, and that was when I started feeling like, okay, this is not everything that I thought it was going to be. And I loved being a mom. I loved all of the things that I could do, but I also didn't get that same sense of fulfillment that I felt like I was supposed to. And I had a whole lot of mom guilt about that. I was thinking like, oh man, like I've been taught that this is the be all end all of my creation and this is what I should love doing. And I didn't. And I missed, times in grad school when I was learning and growing and mentoring other people who could actually respond like with words. That was a really nice thing. And so, way back, even when we'd started dating, we talked about working international or living internationally. And I had been volunteering while even, while my kids were little, with something that I'd been involved in since 2006. It was an English teaching program in Japan, and they just opened up a school right after number one was born. And so I was thinking, oh man, it would be so cool to go out there. And I kept in touch with the professor who started everything. But especially when I was pregnant with number two, and number one was getting bigger and things were getting harder, I'd reached out to the professor and said, hey, so if we were thinking about timelines of moving to Japan, right, with our little family, what would that be like? And we were trying to figure out when we first started talking about it. And you couldn't remember, right?
So I'd known that you had been volunteering,
Yeah.
that you'd been involved in this program before there was a school in Japan to work at. There were summer interns, and you were involved in that before we got married, even before we started dating. And you'd been still volunteering off and on throughout this whole time, doing that whenever you could. And what I saw. You were great with the kids. And it wasn't like you didn't want kids,
No.
but like you enjoyed them, but it was overwhelming. And it was also, and also there was, something missing from what you wanted out of life.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of it. And just, I have a history of depression. It's a thing. And so for me, what it got to was I felt like I was in a rut, and I was trying to figure out what the next thing was going to be. And I couldn't figure it out. And I remember after number one was born, like I tried doing Beachbody stuff and exercising, and I tried, doing life coaching stuff and seeing if that would work. And nothing was hitting the right points. But Japan was something that I knew I could do. I knew they wanted me, and I knew that they would do what they could to get us out there. And so for me, it kind of made sense. I don't know why sometimes now looking back on it, why it made sense, but it did. And so even while I was still pregnant with number two, I started making plans for doing that. And I know we talked about it, about making that change, and everything that happened once number two was born. My postpartum depression with him was particularly bad. I had a lot of health issues. It was a really hard time for me. I honestly don't even remember much of that time period, because of being sleep deprived and feeling so overwhelmed with life and things being hard. So that just kind of reinforced in my brain that yes, let's move to Japan and let's do something different, because I needed something different. I don't want to say miserable, but I didn't know how to move forward in the place that I was.
Would you say like you felt your life was out of control?
Oh, very much so.
I think that's it. Like you didn't feel, you can't control kids.
No, it's just.
And that was so much of your life.
Ask,
Yeah, and my ability, to try and curb that, even with some days off and pop in at lunch occasionally, or, be there a little earlier in the evening, was still pretty limited.
Yeah, and it was wonderful, everything that you did. It's not like you were just like this absentee dad. No, you were there all the time. It was just, there's only so much you could be there when working a full-time job, and also like trying to be a human being, right?
And some of that is like time-based, because with a little baby, they need moms a whole lot more than they need dads. So that year I had as much as I could, number one, but
there's only so much you could do.
Right. And so it wasn't until about the time we were getting ready to move to Japan, that our youngest was 10 months old, that I was able to take care of him a little bit more. And so, seeing that whole thing, I was at this point, noticing that Meg was keeping up with the volunteering, keeping in touch with her mentor. She's reminded me that while we were dating, we talked about potentially living abroad, which was something I was open to. We first met in a class for a study abroad in Japan. So Japan wasn't quite out of the blue. And I knew it was something that's still going on for you. So I did open up conversations about like, hey, if you have a job there, what would that look like? How would we make sure that our family's provided for? That like we had some money saved up, but we wanted to make sure at least we don't go in the hole while we were there.
Yeah.
And you worked out the details. So we had room and board plus a stipend. So that whatever happened, we'd still have our savings, and that would be accruing some interest, right, while we're there. Um, Theoretically, we thought about contracting, and I would contract and maybe be able to make up extra. And so, like, you'd have the kids for a little bit each day, and I wouldn't have a full day, but I'd have like a part day of doing some web development or something like that for contracting. But then, also we talked about like me trying to be an entrepreneur and work for myself and create a new project. And, that kept my skills up, which was a good thing eventually. But man, I bit off so much more than I could chew for being an entrepreneur. I was just trying to create a product that was too big. I didn't have any experience with like product testing and market research and finding your target audience or anything like that. And I was, trying to do it part time. So that particular part didn't pan out. But that was actually fine. Like I was learning regularly, and I really enjoyed that. But when we actually moved over, there's a few things that I found challenging, which is not just that we moved to a school in Japan. We moved like practically to like the Shining Hotel, like or the village outside. If you've read the book, there's a town outside the Shining Hotel, and I'm like, that's about where we were. We were just out almost in the middle of nowhere.
It really was. I mean, I think that town has a year-round population of like 75.
Yeah.
Right? That population goes up a little bit in the summer, or not in the summer, in the winter, right, when it's ski season. but really, like, nobody lives there.
Yeah, we were in a place with like a condos, and they had it wasn't the Shining Hotel because they had these cute old Japanese caretakers who were super kind to our kids. They were very cute. But yeah, it was very there's a lot of solitude, and there were good aspects to it. So like Japanese have like public baths. And I remember because it was so abandoned, it was actually pretty easy outside the ski season to go to like the public baths and have the entire place to myself, which was kind of great. So there's some fantastic things, but if you're talking about social circles, there wasn't a lot personally. For me, there were some of the teachers at the school, which we had a lot of fun with, and then they all turned over. And then there weren't a lot of Japanese people to get to know. There was a few, but even when I had an opportunity to talk to Japanese people, and I'd studied it, but mine was pretty rusty. You'd kept yours up. Meg's is really good, but mine is pretty rusty. And so every time I would try and have a conversation, I was most of the time still watching kids. And so I remember like being at a festival, and it was fun, and there was this nice older gent who was like talking to me. And then, 1 minute into the conversation, he's like, "You should keep your son from reaching into the barbecue pit." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And kind of with young kids, it is hard to socialize. It would have been hard to socialize in the States, but it's even harder when, in a remote village with fewer opportunities, with the language barrier. And then also, like, that's also my tendency when I have kids. I'm not a multitasker, and so when I have kids, I am focused on them, or I'm focused on the person I'm talking to, and my kids are wreaking havoc. So,
which happened a couple of times, but well, and it was an interesting situation. It was a different situation than we had anticipated going in. I mean, we knew it wasn't going to be a big money maker, and that wasn't really why we were doing it. But I ended up having a lot more responsibilities at the school than I was originally supposed to have. And like, I have to say all of this, like, I freaking loved the time that we were in Japan. I miss it every day. And I'm so grateful that we went and that we, made that step to try something different. And that we were also able to learn that in the end, it didn't work for our family. So like originally we were intending to do like 3 to 5 years, right? And we ended up staying for, I usually tell people like a year and a half. It was like a year and 4 months, basically. But yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why we were so isolated is because it was an English immersion school. And where are you going to be able to immerse people in English in Japan? Like, that just doesn't happen if you were around anybody else. And so it was perfect to be around no other people, because then they really could only speak English, the students. So it was ideal for that, right? But yeah, it was hard, and the kids didn't really have a lot of, contact with other kids. And so that was difficult. I mean, the closest like other town was a half hour away. And even then, all the kids were in daycare.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the few kids that existed.
And we couldn't get our kids in their daycare.
Yeah.
That was the other thing. I mean, we could come down and drop them off, and we could pay for someone to watch them, but they wouldn't have been in the class with the other kids because it was full.
Yeah.
And because I was a stay-at-home parent, that like families with 2 working parents got prioritized and whatnot. So there was an activity like once a week, I think, where I could borrow one of the school cars, drive 20 minutes into another town that actually had kids, and they could do kind of like a PE exercise thing with the kids. And then, they enjoyed that. Initially, that was just the oldest, but eventually, both of them were able to go along, and I'm glad I was able to provide that. But there wasn't a lot of interaction. There were a lot of good memories, and so number one was telling me just the other day that that he remembered the Halloween that the students threw for the boys, and so basically they'd knock on the doors of the classrooms and trick or treat, and the kids, the students dressed up. And at least one of them was No Face, which freaked number one out.
Oh my gosh, he was so scared. It was hilarious. I mean, I shouldn't laugh at my child's fear, but
one of them had made like a bloody mask or something like that.
And he was
put on display.
Like, I mean, this thing was freaky. It was like paper mache and blood.
I think he was young enough that I was able to tell him it was just like really messy red paint, and he didn't put it together that it was blood. But anyway, there were some fun memories.
Yeah.
I mean, walking in like the beautiful autumn weather and like shooing the monkeys out of the road.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the snow, we made our own igloo because there was so much snow. Number one fell off like a 10-foot snowdrift onto another snowdrift and like freaked out just because he fell, but then like I belly flopped and then like he started laughing. And I mean, there were like very unique things. It was a beautiful area. But as number one got closer to kindergarten, I started thinking about like, all right, I do want him to be able to play with other kids his own age, but kind of a combination of we weren't saving up money. You mentioned it was a bigger time commitment than you'd originally thought, and that was partially because the principal quit right before we left. So you were supposed to be in charge of training teachers and developing material, and you were principal. And then not only that, the caretakers who were like shoveling, and these were like this super kind, soft-spoken, older Japanese couple who were shoveling snow out for hours to get students into the school when it was blizzarding. And it was too much. Like, it was way too much. They were doing crazy amounts. And so you found brilliant ways that the students took on some of the caretaking, the cleaning, and students were making dinner every
meal
night.
Planning, they were doing it all. I was like, I can't do this. So here's your budget. You need to have at least 2 vegetables and protein. Onions don't count as a vegetable. And have at it. And they did. They figured it out. It was amazing. I mean, and this is one of the things that I feel like we really got from Japan because, I mean, I noticed, certain signs from you, I mean, really just a couple months into it of less than, being thrilled with the situation, right? I don't want to say, full on dissatisfaction, but just kind of like, oh, wow, this is hard. Kind of a thing. I mean, because it was legitimately difficult. And I was doing something that I loved, my dream. And it was crazy, but it was a crazy that I could do. It was a crazy that I could handle or wrap my brain around that I couldn't somehow with children, right? Because these were, high school graduates that we were teaching, and the school was insane. They'd had multiple different leaders over its, year and a half, 2 years of existence before I got there. And so there were really no standard things set up, which was overwhelming, but at the same time, it kind of taught me how to handle all of that administration stuff, which was kind of cool. But you in particular, I saw finding ways to make it work because you wanted me to be able to stay, because I wanted to stay so much. And we had conversations about this and about how hard it was, but also about how you got into meditation and you got your routines. You were having terrible allergies, right? And so every time we faced a new thing, it was like, okay, you were able to bring out your optimization side and figure out how can we deal with this hard thing. And you figured out how to deal with your allergies, between just the basic routines that you had, and then how could you make sure that the boys were still learning and being engaged and you could still stay sane. because I mean, not gonna lie, like that, I don't think I could have done that. That's one of the reasons why we moved to Japan, so I can be like, take your children. I'm going to go work. But at the same time, you know, we were able to troubleshoot things as a couple, and I remember those being some of our hardest conversations.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely. Well, so when we talk about allergies, just to clarify.
Oh yeah, this is way worse than just allergies.
Yeah, it wasn't just like having a runny nose. When I woke up in, you know, the second day in the country, I could barely breathe. I could, like, my throat didn't close up like completely, but I was gasping for breath. And we got some meds to stabilize that, but I eventually found a way, like experimented with a bunch of different things. I had to wear a mask for a while, which they do that when they're sick. So I think a lot of students and other people are like, what is up with this guy? He's been wearing a mask for a month. But it wasn't because I was sick, it was because I had the allergies. I tried a bunch of things, and eventually yoga helped sufficiently that I wasn't constantly on medication.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we're troubleshooting things like that. You were troubleshooting things at the school, and I think that piece of like having the students do dinner so you didn't have to handle that.
Yeah.
Like that was a brilliant piece of delegation and lifestyle design. And so we're tweaking a lot of things. And then we're having hard conversations. We were having hard conversations. I remember even before we left, you made me promise that I wouldn't blame you if it didn't turn out okay.
Oh, I forgot about that, but you're right, I did.
That was hard, and I felt like, wait, I'm trying to help you go, and like, and I want to try this out. I can't promise it's going to be good for me, because you know, I knew it was going to be hard, and so I wasn't going to tell you like I'm going to fall in love with this, but like I'm taking responsibility for making this choice with you that we're both going to go, right?
Yeah, knowing that it was going to be probably pretty difficult. And I think I was just worried that you were like going to hate me because I felt selfish, right, at the time. I felt like I was doing this because I couldn't handle regular life because, I mean, in my mind at the time, I couldn't. And I mean, one of the things that I think is amazing, we talk about all of these troubleshooting things and life design things, but a lot of it was so that, you know, you could figure out how to reconcile, you know, family and work, and how I could reconcile, you know, work and family. And it was just kind of another step in our journey to figure out how we can both find satisfaction in our lives and still give our family the care that, you know, they deserve and that we, you know, need because we love each other. And then also be able to provide, you know, a good living, and I balance all of those. And Japan was, I think, pretty instrumental in that because it was where I learned how to kind of set boundaries at work because I'm a total workaholic. Alec laughs, but it's true. I really like being needed, and I like being paid for being needed and for doing something that I'm good at that other people cannot do for themselves. But like also receiving recognition. So with motherhood, I was doing all kinds of stuff that our kids couldn't do for themselves, but there's really not a whole lot of recognition in that. And I mean, there's the, you know, reward of them being your children and that love, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. But it's sometimes nice for, you know, someone to tell you, good job, here's some money. You did a great thing here.
I'm going to give kids some money.
To give to me. Here, mommy. Yeah, they're going to start paying me. Oh gosh, that would make an interesting... Yeah. What a wonderful dynamic we would have. But really, yeah. So I learned how to, you know, say no to some things at work, to say like, look, this, I will give as much as I can and as I am contracted for, but I cannot give more than that because I have this other thing that is really important to me. And recognizing what those values were, what was important, and being able to find out for myself, okay, so I really like working. I have a hard time working at the same time as having a family. And the way that we tried to go about it in Japan didn't end up working out long-term for our family, but it was a step towards that. It was a step towards me figuring out what I was good at, and having an adventure. Because for me, I mean, Japan was just the biggest, best adventure. I have so many good memories of Japan. You know, and then when we came back, right? Because I knew that we would be coming back earlier than we'd intended. And I was just trying to hold on to any last like little bit of time. So we'd spent a year out in Niigata-ken, which we really were out in the middle of nowhere. And I wanted to see if we could get to 2 years. And our options were to move out to this place called Saitama that had other people, and I'd be able to do some stuff, and it would be a lot of figuring things out, or move to Kyoto and do things remotely. And lots of crazy stuff happened on the job end of that. But kind of the upshot of it was that we moved to Kyoto and lived in this house for 4 months. Kind of knowing that at the end of that one semester, we were probably going to be going home. And that was really hard for me because I saw this thing that I wanted so badly coming to an end. Also knowing that it did not work for our family, but it worked for me personally. And so that right there was like, oh, I've had times in my life where things were great for my family and I was not happy. I was not fulfilled. And now I've had this time where I'm fulfilled, but it doesn't work for my family. And like, that was a big blow to me. That was really hard to accept that, and to accept that, okay, well, there's got to be another option. And obviously you guys are way more important to me than any job. You were even, amazing enough to say, you can stay here and we will make things work, and I'll go back to the States and we'll do long distance and travel. And there were lots of options thrown around, but in the end, I mean, there's no way, like I wouldn't want to be separated from you for a job. That just seems silly. Because of where my personal values lie. And so we came back, and it was hard. I basically imploded because I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd had this time where, like, it was hard and it was crazy, but I knew what to do, and I was achieving things and I was being recognized for it, back to kind of where I'd been before, but without a job and just kids who somehow needed more than they did when we left, because they were now 2 and 4. And that was a hard time for me because I had to really reevaluate. And I had times in my life, we've talked recently about, like, how do you know it's time to make a life change, right? Mm-hmm. And I have lots of times where for me, it's just like this gradual slip into depression where I get into this rut and I don't recognize that I'm there until I've been there for a while. And I kind of like have some sort of wake up call to, Meg, this isn't working for you. Let's figure something else out. But coming back from Japan was not like that. Coming back from Japan was like massive explosions of bad in my brain. It wasn't a gradual, seepage into depression.
I mean, it was sudden, but also I think it was frightening that the time in Japan was shorter than you expected and now behind you.
Yeah.
And like,
right?
that does change a lot.
It does. And I didn't know what was next. And I really like at least having some idea of what I could do. And I just had no idea. And I kind of wallowed for a bit. And felt justified in my wallowing because I was like, well, that was a failure. Even though, like, for me, it really was not a failure. I don't think. But at the time I felt like a failure. And I felt like there's just nothing left. I just have to be a stay-at-home mom and suck it up. But again, it didn't work for me. And so I just had to go kind of on hope that something would get better. And again, with a lot of support from you, start exploring, right? And so that one, it wasn't, this gradual thing. It was like, okay, well, let's do an evaluation. Where am I right now in my life? How do I feel about my family life? How do I feel about my health, which was not good at the time, mental or physical? How do I feel about my career opportunities, volunteer opportunities, spirituality, all of those different things? What are the things that I value, and how do I feel like I am living up to those? So I did a lot of soul searching, a lot of reading, a lot of writing. And I just kind of took it one day at a time, really hoping that something would happen and just hoping to be able to figure out what the next right thing was. And by kind of putting myself out there when I didn't really want to, I I started, being around other people because I needed support. And then one of those people, who I don't even remember who she was, mentioned, well, you could become a private tutor. And there's all kinds of people willing to pay for that. I was like, I could do that. So I put my stuff up on care.com, and a person found me, and he's like, hey, yeah, so I want you to teach one of my students. Also, I've got a bunch of other students and they really need all of these things that you're really good at. And so let's do some like seminars and stuff. And all of a sudden I was back. I had something that I could do and something that I could work towards. And so that's what I did. And it was wonderful. But that period in between of not knowing, right? And trying to figure it out was scary. And I just had to try stuff until something stuck. I looked at other jobs. I'd actually applied to a couple of jobs and nothing really panned out there. But each of those little things led to the next one, to where, I've ended up tutoring a lot. I've helped, kind of create some curriculum for teaching English in China. I've done some life coaching stuff, and I've helped a lot of people with college applications, just a lot of different things. And I'm kind of back there right now, right? At the, okay, so what's next? Because I've done this for a while. Yeah, so basically here I am now, gosh, 2 years post figuring things out after Japan, 2.5 years post actually coming back from Japan. It took me about 6 months of implosion and recovery to get to where I could even think about moving forward with my life. But I've really enjoyed what I've done. I've tutored a lot of people in various subjects. I've helped people with college applications. I've done life coaching, academic consulting, helped create some curriculum for people learning English in China. Just really done a whole lot. And now I feel like I'm a little bit back where I was a couple of years ago, where I'm looking towards, all right, well, what's the next step? And the way that I've kind of understood that is a little bit more gradual, and it's not the depression and it's not the implosion. It's this feeling kind of antsiness, right?
Yeah.
Of like, okay, so I've been doing the same thing for a while. What's next? Because I like adventure. I like new things and big things. And it just feels like time for something. And so I'm keeping my, eyes out for the next stuff, and hopefully, taking a leaf out of previous me's book and doing stuff, just trying things and seeing what happens and seeing if it will work out. Because having had that experience of success in the past and of failure in the past, knowing that if you try something new and it completely fails, you'll recover. Or if you try something new and you're crazy successful, you'll get bored eventually. So what do you want to do next? And finding more joy in that journey, as cliche as it sounds, right? I hate that, but it is kind of nice, and it feels good and exciting anyways.
Yeah, and so, I mean, just looking back at the different phases, I mean, we started out just kind of default, me working full-time, you stay-at-home mom, and in that phase, that led up to you learning how to ask me to step up in the family and make changes, weighing in on my career decision, although that was also led by my own desire to move from LinkedIn to another position, someplace more education oriented and aligning with my interests there. So that was like us optimizing my careers together, but that wasn't far enough, and we kept going, and then we're like, all right, Japan, too far.
Funny.
Kabam. And it kind of flipped roles. Like, that was my time to learn how to ask for things from you. Like, all right, scale this back, and you take the kids a little longer in the afternoon. I think one of the tricky things that came up for me in Japan is we had talked about, if this doesn't work out, we can come back. We hadn't talked about what time frame. Yeah. So we talked about potentially being there 3 to 5 years if it works out, but we didn't talk about when we'd reevaluate. And I mean, as you said, I didn't say like we need to go home after a couple months, but I was open that it was being really hard.
Yeah.
And that was a difficult conversation. It was very charged at first.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't making that as an accusation, although I was frustrated and hard.
But I was so a little bit, like myopic, really.
Right.
And I really want this. You're trying to make me go home already. Like,
Right.
and
It
so I got
felt like an
defensive.
accusation,
Yeah.
or that you weren't doing enough, and you were doing a lot. Like, it wasn't that I didn't appreciate that.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. I think we've both been in a situation
Mhm.
where we're trying to help out as much as we can, and that's not enough.
Yeah.
That there's a lifestyle change the other person needs to be
Yes.
able to make, even if you're helping as much as you can. And that's
Yeah.
not an accusation for you. And so, like, we were working on that pretty hard in Japan.
Mhm.
And then eventually what happened is, when it didn't work out, we had to go somewhat back to what we knew. So we came back to the States. We're close to my parents again, which was nice.
It was really nice.
Because my entrepreneurship stuff didn't pan out, but it kept my skills programming current. And so that I was able to get a job. I had offers within like a week of us moving back, which is great. I'd already been looking beforehand. But on the other hand, it was what I knew, and it was giving a shot at that again, because trying to create a web development product and market that and be a product manager and salesperson and all of that myself, like, that was over way too much, and the project I had chosen was way too ambitious. I needed to start a whole bunch smaller if I was going to do that, but I was going to try my web development career again and see if I could be manager. And I was kind of at this point realizing, like, I want to tackle problems other than code. Most problems are not, in fact, really code-based problems. They're people-based problems. And so I wanted to solve that. I think what we did differently during this phase is we talked about when we'd make a change. And we ended up making a change earlier. I think we talked about trying to make the 3-year mark.
Yeah.
But because of COVID and everything like that, there was a combination of COVID. There was a combination of, with COVID and other factors, my manager said I'd kind of passed all my manager tests, but they weren't hiring people for me to manage. And they weren't going to transfer me somewhere else where I could manage. And so I just realized, like, all right, I was going to make it to 3 years to see if I could get to manager, and that would work out for us. And that's not going to happen in 3 years. And then I'd seen other things, like, for instance, I liked coaching people, but most managers in my work weren't good coaches, which meant that's not something eventually that's like a need for my current job.
Yeah.
And so, given that, like, if that's not something they value, then I would have to find another way to work that out. And that's where we'd have enough experience with the different careers, and we'd been planning this for a couple of years, talking about different options, different ways things would look, that basically it got to a point where I was able to negotiate with my work, having a great contractor salary, California contractor salary, move to Texas, where we'd be saving up a whole bunch of money, even if I was working half-time. And then that would allow me to scale up my coaching career and transition my coaching career, and also give you flexibility, with the goal of us both working part-time and being with the kids part-time.
Yeah.
And the kids having school, which help, now that they're older.
That's nice.
Right.
But also, I feel like the kind of rhythm that we've settled into here has been really good, because we both, I feel like, are able to devote more time and energy to our kids than we could when either of us was doing it full time, right? Because we switch off and we have time to recuperate, in that aspect. And also, like, we get to pursue passion projects, but they don't consume our lives, right? Because they're not the be all end all of what we're doing, because we have these other things. And just kind of where we've settled. I mean, it's weird with COVID and all of that. I mean, just that the world is weird right now, but in some ways I'm like, wow, I've never felt more satisfied with life, which who could say that right now?
Well, because we've learned how to optimize the things within our control.
Yeah, right. To make the things where I really do look forward to my time with the kids, and picking them up and finding out how their school went, finding whatever activities we can do right now in the area. I feel like I have a lot more energy to devote to that, because I'm not having to do it all the time. But that also, I get to work and I can be flexible with my work. and find ways to still do that while allowing time for kids and like, going to the gym occasionally, gasp, and having friends. So that's really nice.
And yeah, it comes from overshooting the mark several times. And it's hard because when you're thinking about your life built around a full-time career, full-time job, it's really hard to make those compromises. And it can, I mean, some people like the traditional model, like one person working full-time, one person stay-at-home parent full-time, and that works for some people great. I've talked to a lot of people who make little tweaks on that. So they get a full-time or full-time-ish, but more flexible job so they can spend more times with the kids. And, their spouse works a little bit, but,
or has like an Etsy hobby or something like that.
Or yeah, something like that where it's scaled. And that didn't really seem to hit it for either of us.
Yeah.
And so we had to figure out, all right, what are flexible careers, and look more into like, contract careers are more flexible than full-time ones.
How can we do it and still afford like health insurance?
Right. Yeah, and that takes time. Like there were several iterations, and there were definitely times where one of us was sacrificing more than the others. And I think, I don't feel like that's happening right now.
No.
I think we're
finally at the place where we're not like neither of us is sacrificing more or taking more. We're kind of doing this together, right? And I always come back to when I was in grad school or something, we had some career person come in and they were talking about developing your career and how it starts out as like, go, it's not like the steady incline or whatever. You go like, and, kind of like gradually end up where you are. And I feel like we've done some of those big, crazy things and we're still not quite there yet, I don't think. And I'm not sure if anybody ever gets there because once you get there, there's somewhere else to go afterwards.
Right, and there'll still be some curveballs.
Exactly.
So
and so it's recognizing what those curveballs are when they come. So saying, okay, well, have we had any changes recently? And doing that reevaluation, keeping up the communication. At one point we'd set up like, okay, Monday nights are our nights. Do you remember? Yeah. So Monday nights are our nights to talk about hard things. What is on your mind? And like I had to have it scheduled because I'm a very schedule oriented person. So like Monday nights we talked about hard things, and then Tuesday nights we did our own thing, and then Wednesday nights we did something fun, and then Thursday nights we did our own thing again, and then Friday nights we had game night, and it was very scheduled, but it was kind of nice to have those conversations scheduled to begin with. I don't feel like we need to schedule them anymore. Like we could just talk about it now. But having a time where it was like, okay, I don't have to think about how to bring this up. Because this is our time to bring this up.
The thinking about like when do you reevaluate your life, and if things are not going well for one of you or both in the partnership, and there were still things that I want to do in my career that I wasn't getting out of my career. So it wasn't like I was just changing careers just to accommodate you.
Yeah.
It was points at which we could reevaluate, and I could try to make some improvements. And even though Japan didn't work out, like that first foray into working for myself, developing the discipline of a personal routine every day, and how to get to myself to work and be productive every day on my own, like that definitely was a building block for what came later. And also, that's something else I'd point out, to other couples that hit the same point where the traditional model of full-time dad, stay-at-home mom doesn't work for you. If there's a point at which you're done having kids for a while, and they're old enough that dad can take care of them, I think that is something to consider, is find a way, if possible, where you can give mom a break for a couple of years to recover from that like super intense, baby stage, and shoulder a little bit more of the early childhood. And that was only possible because I was in a career coding that had flexible options, but that's something maybe to think of ahead of time to see if there's some way you could do that. And in the end, I may have lost the time that I wasn't getting promotions during that time, but I could step back into that because I was prepared, and we did that thoughtfully, whereas keeping up my skills so that I could step back into the coding job when needed. And so, I think that really worked. We learned a lot from that. And it was an overcorrection, but sometimes you don't really learn and get the lessons you need unless you really go for it, right?
Yeah.
We tried taking the small steps, and they weren't far enough.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm really glad that we did do a big change. And I always value, as the other thing that I take away from this is seeing the sacrifice you made and coming back. That has cemented in our relationship to me, how much you care about the family and that you made a very deliberate choice. When we were trying to figure out what are all the potential options and doing having you with some time in Japan, sometimes here or traveling or figuring out something like that, you had made the choice because of your values that you wanted to figure this out with us. And that constraint was really hard at first.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as you explored, you started finding things that make it work. And that's also true of a lot of lifestyle design. When you feel like you're in a bind, that something isn't working, you have to step into the darkness and make some changes to see what's possible.
Yeah.
And then things start to look different. And it didn't happen suddenly, but things start to look different over time when you actually make those changes.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like there's a whole other video just as far as like the mental processes that I went through over those years, right, to kind of come to where I'm at now. Including just like reevaluating the meaning of life and all of, I mean, really like deep, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm functionally, looking at things and figuring out, what those little corrections are, and then make a big change, and then dealing with things that, will be coming up in the future, and trying things. We, put 1 and 2 both in soccer, and 1's doing great and 2's not so much. And so we're like, okay, well, great. Well, we learned that okay, 1 is ready for this and 2 is probably not. And awesome, we learned something, and I feel like we can do a lot of that because we give each other the benefit of the doubt. I think is one of the biggest things that we've had to learn, that like neither of us is trying to do this to be selfish or to, whatever. It's just expressing needs and wants as well. So kind of like reserving judgment, and also knowing that failure is not the end of the world, right? That things can go poorly and we can recover and learn from it, and being able to find meaning in the failures and the successes. For me, that's been very helpful. But yeah, knowing that like it's, when you talk about the, don't blame me if this goes bad, I totally forgotten about that. But that's very much how a lot of my life has been. I've always been worried that I'm going to make a mistake that will negatively affect other people, and recognizing that I can be comfortable enough in our relationship to know that you're not going to hate me for making a mistake, or even for willfully doing something that's bad, or whatever, because we have more mutual trust there. And I feel like we've had to build that. We both have had to commit and talk about that.
We're both very independent by nature.
Right?
And even with number 1, I mean, we kind of scheduled out our time and we handled our own business, right?
Yeah.
And we
traded
off.
I got it now, you got it now, okay.
In such a way that at first we didn't really have to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And so having the conversation both from the side of saying, I need something, being able to say that gracefully, and on the other side, receive that not as criticism, but as, all right, I have an opportunity to help. Both of those pieces we had to learn.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of practice. And a lot of that came out from being in the stressful situation of Japan. Although there's also a lot of positive memories from that. That was the unique time. And that was great for you. It was hard for me. I definitely don't regret it.
I know.
And I look at that as a very formative, powerful experience, although, I'm glad we could come back when we did.
Yay. Yeah. And again, it's one of those things that you can ascribe meaning to in hindsight, but it's difficult to experience. And you just kind of have to, step forward in faith, sometimes a little bit blindly, and knowing that I have a partner who's doing it with me, right? As opposed to just kind of like alongside me, like we're a team. We're not just parallel people. I think that really helps. And so, yeah.
And I mean, I think a good follow-up of that is we spent a lot of time figuring out how to say I need. And it's only last couple of weeks we took a step back and thought about, well, what about asking each other for things we want but we don't need?
I'm still learning that one. I'm not
both
good
of
at
us.
that one.
Yeah, we're both learning that. That was kind
Yeah.
of funny. Like, wait, we spent so much time or many big transitions going through survival mode, and we're at a point where we don't have to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And the next optimization is just like, all right, well, how do we talk to each other about just wanting stuff?
Well, and it's funny. So like, we tell our kids, well, I tell our kids, and you picked up on this from me, is use your words, ask for what you need. Don't just say like, I'm hungry, like, okay, great. That's like, for me, that's a complaint.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is a complaint without a solution. Right? As opposed to, Mom, may I please have some food? Oh, that's a request. That is something that I can do. I can't do anything about you being hungry. I mean, I can like infer and do all of that stuff, but I don't want to have to do that. I want you to like ask for it, right? And yeah, I don't do that myself with my wants. I'll do it with my needs if they're, intense enough needs, like I'm gonna be miserable if we don't do whatever. But wants, like I'm just so used to having to handle those on my own. But also recognizing that, yeah, you do struggle with that. So yesterday you mentioned, so for a while I was making veggie smoothies, right? And yesterday you'd mentioned about how that was a good thing. You said you didn't want to demand it, but you really liked it. You never actually came out and requested it.
Oh, you're right. Can you make veggie smoothies?
I would love to, because it's not a demand. It's a good request.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I mean, and I did grow up in a situation where people
Right?
anticipated each other's needs.
I did not.
And so I register some of those things, like, some of those things as like, wait, I made the request, or I told her I liked it. I don't want to force her to do it. I don't want to be overly demanding.
But I like being asked. And I think that
and feeling needed.
Yeah, and feeling needed. Yes, exactly, right? For me, it's a request. I'm like, oh, it's something that I can do, that I can show him how much I love him by making a veggie smoothie. And it's good for me too. Honestly, I like them as well. I've just been, busy and thinking about other things, and so it's kind of, gotten left behind. And so, but feeling loved because of the request. Like for me, I think that's a big thing. And you kind of expressed that as well, that you like being asked to, help me with things that I want, not just need. So like if my neck is sore or something, asking for a massage or something, and it's nice. So getting to that, I don't know, point in our relationship, I guess.
Yeah. So,
couples counseling.
Yeah, couples counseling. So yeah, hopefully this has been helpful. This is longer than a typical episode. But one of the things I think is really important is none of us are making our decisions in a vacuum, especially if you're married. A lot of the career work-life balance issues are really optimizing for both of you as a team and having those conversations, making sure it's not one person sacrificing all the time, being able to have I need conversations and being able to hear those conversations without being defensive. Those are all things that are really important. Trial and error. The adjustments, you can try and make small adjustments, but I think most people, before they find a place that works for them for a significant period of time, do need to push their comfort zone, try and make a big adjustment to really see how far they can go in the opposite direction. And some people, I mean, they make a big adjustment and they just love it, right?
Yep.
That didn't work out, but I'm sure there will be big adjustments in the future.
Oh, yes, I'm sure.
All right. So thanks for watching. If this is helpful, of course, always you can hit the like button or subscribe to get the latest videos, and you can leave comments. Tell me if you want to see more of Meg. She's great. So, and I'll catch you next week. Until next week, make big changes, one small habit at a time.
Bye.